The 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees that no one shall be denied the right to vote based on gender. Why was this amendment necessary? How long did it take for it to become part of the Constitution? Throughout the early 1870s, the National Woman Suffrage Association attempted multiple legal challenges with the hope of gaining women the right to vote. They argued that women should have this right based on the 15th Amendment, which states that all citizens should have the right to vote. The Supreme Court heard 3 cases on this matter, the most famous being Minor versus Hackenberg. Each time they ruled that this amendment only referred to male citizens. After these defeats, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony tried a different approach. They authored a constitutional amendment which was introduced in the Senate by Aaron Sargent, a senator from California who was a strong advocate of women's suffrage. He formally introduced the measure in January of 1878. The Senate made no effort to act on the proposal until 9 years later. Finally, in 1887, the amendment was voted on and rejected by the Senate with a vote of 16 in favor and 34 opposed. Suffragists such as Carrie Chapman Catt then began to concentrate on a state-by-state effort to achieve suffrage. Many of the new western states, such as Wyoming, Utah, and Washington, were already allowing women to vote. Throughout the early 1900s, many more western states were added to this number, with 15 states eventually passing women's suffrage laws prior to 1920. However, despite these successes, the idea of a constitutional amendment would not go away. The amendment was proposed again in 1914, as well as 1915 and 1918. Each time, it failed to receive the required number of votes. The amendment was voted on again by the House of Representatives in February of 1919, and once again failed to pass, but only by 1 vote. On May 21st, 1919, the measure was voted on once more, finally receiving the necessary votes. It was then voted on by the Senate, who also approved the amendment after a lengthy discussion. This was only the first step in approving the new constitutional amendment. It had received the necessary 2/3 vote from both the House of Representatives and the Senate, but in order to become part of the Constitution, another step was necessary. 3/4 of the state legislatures needed to ratify the amendment. This could have been a lengthy process, with some amendments not being approved for years, if at all. The first 3 states to ratify the amendment were Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. All 3 of these states did so on June the 10th, 1919. Over the course of the next year, states continually ratified the amendment, one at a time. A total of 36 states were needed in order for the amendment to become law. Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify, making the 19th Amendment official on August the 18th, 1920. The amendment reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." The amendment was not a popular one amongst some citizens. Many did not feel that women should be allowed to vote. It was immediately challenged in court. The Supreme Court case known as Lesser versus Garnett argued that this amendment took away a state's right to determine for itself whether women should vote. The Supreme Court dismissed this claim and upheld the amendment as being constitutional. Some states still refused to ratify the amendment, even though it was now law. Many southern states, such as South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina, did not ratify the amendment until the 1970s. Mississippi did not ratify it until March 22, 1984. Regardless of the protest against the amendment, the goal of the women's suffrage movement had been achieved. Women began voting immediately, and they soon became a powerful force in the world of politics.
My name is Paulina, and this is my Iowa Minute. Women's rights activist and suffragette Carrie Chapman Catt came up with the winning plan to pass the 19th Amendment in 1920. She was the leader of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. These are a couple of things that make Carrie Chapman Catt famous in Iowa. Born on January 9, 1859 in Wisconsin, Carrie Chapman Catt worked as a teacher to pay her own way through Iowa State College. She graduated in 1880, the only woman in her class. At the age of 24, she became one of the first women to be appointed superintendent of schools in 1883. She married Leo Chapman in 1885 and followed him to San Francisco later that year. By the time she arrived, he had died from typhoid fever. She stayed and became the city's first female newspaper reporter. Returning to Iowa in 1887, Carrie Chapman Catt began a new phase in her life. She joined the Iowa Women's Suffrage Association as a writer and lecturer. She then worked on a national level for the movement. She proved to be a worthy successor, increasing the size of the organization membership and conducting some substantial fundraising. She married George Catt in 1890 and became the successor to Susan B. Anthony for the National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1900. Carrie Chapman Catt left her NAWSA post in 1904 because of her husband's health problems. So sure that women would get the right to vote, she helped establish the League of Women Voters to encourage women to use their hard-won right in 1920 before the amendment was passed. But Catt had indeed come up with the winning plan to campaign at both state and federal levels at the same time, and the deaths of her husband in 1905 and Susan V. Anthony in 1906, Carrie Chapman Catt founded the League of Women Voters and served as its honorary president for the rest of her life. In 1921, she came back to the Iowa State University to give the commencement speech to that graduating class, the first woman to do so. She published 2 books on the suffrage movement and founded the National Committee on the Cause and Cure for War. She also supported the League of Nations and continued to until her death on March 9, 1947. She was a feminist role model for many females, which meant that the beliefs of men and women should have the equal rights and opportunities. Carrie was a feminist that took charge the organized a movement to support the rights and interests of women. Carrie Chapman Catt's girlhood home is now a historical site and open to the public in Charles City, Iowa.